we live? There we are. Welcome back to Tailosive Tech live on YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you're having a fantastic Thursday. We've got some kind of interesting developments coming from Bloomberg. A little bit weird, but kind of logical next step, because Tim Cook's whole legacy is going to be based around services, right? And the monthly subscription cost. And every time someone looks up Tim Cook in the history books, you're going to think Ted Lasso, because that's what he's made Apple known for, is basically just trying to pivot them from, you know, this lucrative growing hardware business into more of a recurring revenue software business. But I have a theory that basically Apple's services between TV Plus, Arcade, and News Plus and all that, and even the Apple Card, have not really turned out to be quite as profitable as they may have liked. Probably the best one they have going for them right now is like a combination of Apple Care, iCloud, iCloud storage, as well as Apple Music. I bet those are all doing pretty well. Oh, hey Scott, hey James, we're live. Hey Alpha, $9.99 a month to use the camera app. Pretty much exactly. But Bloomberg basically dropped this report earlier today talking about how Apple wants to pivot more of their hardware into monthly fee, which is obviously very similar to what Apple's kind of already done with the iPhone upgrade program. So a lot of people were comparing that to what this report said. Like, how is this any different from what the Apple Card is offering? I know what the general premise of it is, but I just wanted to get the quote out so that I'm not misquoting or anything. But it's kind of a weird concept. Basically, instead of what the iPhone upgrade program is, which is basically paying for the phone slowly over time in installments, this seems to be at least more of a push towards like using the product on a monthly basis, but never actually getting towards ownership of it. So I think that's the big difference for people to understand, like, why the Apple Card offering financing options is not quite the same thing. So that's what I see a lot of people confused on, is like, isn't this the exact same thing as just paying for something over the course of 12 or 24 months like you do with the Apple Card? No, this is supposedly something that would be available to everyone. It would not be restricted to Apple Card users, which is actually a big market, because that means that if Apple did offer these monthly subscription type packages, they could actually allow for other countries outside of the United States to pay for things monthly. So this is not necessarily what I think is an exciting development for Apple. I would be far more interested in them making a dedicated camera or making a car. That sounds far more fun to me. But from a business perspective, I kind of understand their logic here, because from Tim Cook's perspective, and I think Apple can see this coming, the upgrades year over year that Apple can apply to all of their products. And it's not just the iPhone, but the iPhone's their bread and butter. So that's a good example of, like, honestly, they probably should have called the iPhone 13 the 12S. Yeah, subscribe for more RAM, exactly. You can unlock more components. They'll just put in the full speed M1 Ultra chip in your computer, but it's software limited to the M1 Pro. And if you up your subscription, then it goes up to M1 Ultra. Oh no, that's so terrible of an idea. You know it's going to happen. But basically, the reason I think they called it iPhone 13, aside from the fact that 12S Pro Max probably would have been a bit of a mouthful, the bigger reason that Apple is probably moving forward with regular number upgrades, iPhone 12, iPhone 13, iPhone 14, iPhone 11, you know, all of that, is likely because they know that the changes year over year are going to get incrementally smaller and smaller. I mean, already the big differences between the iPhone 13 and 14 are mostly going to be with the Pros adopting the eye hole instead of the notch. But when it comes to the regular iPhone 14, like the 6.1-inch 14 versus the 6.1-inch 13, what differences are going to be there? Well, the camera bump's not getting substantially larger, so I don't think they're giving it the 48 megapixel sensor, and Kuo is saying they're not even going to give the A16 chip. So they beef up the RAM, they beef up the GPU cores a little bit, but it's still the same OLED display, still 60 Hz, still Lightning. Apple knows that there's only so many noticeable upgrades and changes they can actually make to their hardware, so it's likely going to become far more profitable for them to try to pivot people to start paying monthly for things that doesn't actually get them closer to ownership. Because that means if someone is complacent and they're comfortable with the hardware they have and they don't feel like upgrading, they'll just continue to pay monthly for it. And then whenever you're ready to upgrade and you're like, I'm done with this model, I want to get a newer one, then because you don't own it, you'll be required to send it back, and then Apple can sell that certified refurbished or offer it at a lower tier plan, and they'll probably try to rope people into these packages by offering them certain software services, which you wouldn't ordinarily pay $5 or $10 a month for, but if you get it included, people can justify it a little bit. Josh T says I'm the only channel he's a paid subscriber to. Well, that's very kind of you, Josh. I don't know why you chose me, but thank you very much. Outside of the obvious factor money, I wonder if this also has something to do with the recycling initiatives. Get people on this upgrade program. Every device gets sent back instead of thrown away. I suppose so. There might be an yeah. You know what? The more I think about that, telephone backgrounds, it's complicated names. They would probably have a fairly high incentive for people. Come on, center stage, focus. They would have a fairly high incentive for people to send back their hardware. You know, right now, if people are used to buying their phones unlocked all the time, then when they're ready for a new phone, they just kind of keep their old phone in a drawer and it sits around. Whereas if you knew you were going to get charged $40 or $50 a month to hold on to that old phone, you would be a lot more incentive to, well, they're trying to do that already with the trade-in program, but I think they could just incentivize more people to go with their services and to go with monthly fees if they knew that they could get some software packages along with it. Like if you rent your Mac, we'll throw in 200 gigabytes of iCloud storage for free. Or if you rent your iPad, then we'll throw in Apple TV Plus for free. So you're paying a monthly fee for it. And I'm sure people will quickly do the math of like, okay, it becomes cheaper if you hold on to it for 3 years or 4 years. But if you hold on to it for less than that, it's actually cheaper to rent. But that means that since you're paying money towards something you won't own, Apple gets the hardware at the end of the day, and then they can use that money towards other things. Thank you for the super chat, Rough Riders Show. He says, you, Nick, and Randy are amazing. Thanks. Has Apple fixed the studio display cam issue yet, and do you still recommend it, or should I find something else? I don't think I've ever just flat out recommended it. I've always had the caveat on the only people who should be buying the studio display are people that absolutely will appreciate and utilize the bells and whistles. There's all kinds of bells and whistles. As far as just display panels go, there are much cheaper monitors out there that are just 5K, 60 hertz with a decent color palette. And frankly, I think 5K is unnecessary for the vast majority of users. So if you can just grasp a 4K monitor, you could probably get that for less than half the price in a decent design with fairly good reviews. The people who should be buying the studio display are people who want the, 96 watt single use Thunderbolt cable that, does video output, and you want the extra USB-C ports, and you want it to charge your MacBook. You want it to do all of that through a single cable. That is who should be interested. People who want center stage, which the studio display offers. People who want the built-in spatial audio speakers, which sound really, really good. Those are people who should be prioritizing. People who care about the glossy glass and want the premium metal chassis. All of those features, all of those bells and whistles the studio display has going for it. That's who should be prioritizing it, not just anybody. Anybody could probably be comfortable with a $400 monitor on Amazon. They've mostly fixed it. Thank you for the super chat, Josh. I'm just trying to answer all the last questions. Basically, I think that the compression isn't as bad since they've updated the software on the studio display, but I'm discovering, as you guys might be able to tell from this live stream, center stage is not that great at keeping me in the center, or it's possible that it keeps wanting to include the ghosts in this room. There's all kinds of ghosts hanging out behind me, and center stage keeps wanting to... It'll focus on my chair. If I push my chair away from me, it'll get all wide, and sometimes I'll be in the middle like this, and it won't center. Like right now, for example, I'm talking here, but it's not keeping me in the center unless I bump my head this way. So it's just a little bit buggy, but for the most part, yes, it's a very nice monitor, a very clean looking one if you're into minimalistic and simplistic desk setups, like you don't want complicated plastic crunchy monitors and all these cables plugging into your laptop and dedicated speakers. If you just want one monitor that's it's kind of like the perfect MacBook accessory. It's like it provides you with a bigger display, it gives you center stage, it gives you more I/O, it gives you more ports, it gives you better speakers, it gives you extra microphones. It can do all of this through a single port on your laptop, which is pretty cool. So if you care about those bells and whistles, yes, I recommend it. If none of those things sound very useful or interesting to you, there's so many cheaper monitors to go with. Because I watch you more than all the other tech YouTubers. Been watching you since the Attic days. Keep up the great work. Oh, okay. Thank you. I see your super chat here. Liam says, is there a leak suggesting this, or are we speculating here? No, this is from Bloomberg, who's been fairly reputable with their reporting in the past. So the fact that Bloomberg is reporting on this hardware subscription service for iPhones and other devices, which means this could apply to Apple Watches, iPads, MacBooks, Mac Studios even, where you push everything into a monthly fee, to kind of incentivize people to continue upgrading and getting new hardware. Sounds believable to me because Bloomberg does have fairly legitimate sources. So this is not just speculation. Okay, Josh T super chatted the same thing. I was gonna get to your message anyway, but thank you. I appreciate the donation. Raven F super stickered, I guess, the cat. Didn't say anything, but thank you. I appreciate it. And then Rough Rider Shows says, good deal. Also, how much better are the speakers on the studio display than the iMac Pro? Thanks. So, I'm no audiophile. Marquez said they're the best desktop speakers Apple's ever made. I have a feeling Marquez has not listened to the iMac Pro speakers recently. I was using the iMac Pro up until, a couple weeks ago. And I think that there's a few pros and cons from what I've noticed comparing the speakers of the iMac Pro to the speakers of the studio display, is that the iMac Pro has fairly front-firing speakers. That if you've seen an iMac Pro teardown, that there's treble speakers right behind the display, and I don't really hear those as clearly on the studio display. But one advantage I will give to the studio display between different music and videos I've watched, I've been watching all my content on the studio display as of lately, I think the studio display hits lower frequencies. Again, I'm not an audiophile, so I'm probably not a great example of this, but from what I can tell, there's like a wider range. Hey, the man about tech super chatted. Thanks, thanks for tuning in. What's up? Good to see you. Thanks, man. Wow, $10. That was generous of you. Hey, it's good to see you, man. Hope you're doing well over in Chicago. But yeah, like the sound quality is very balanced. Like you can turn up the studio display speakers as loud as you want and they don't peak at all. They sound fantastic and they hit low frequencies, but despite all of that, they're not quite directed at you. They're kind of being pushed outward, kind of like an iPad speaker system. Like they're being pushed out to the side, and yes, it fills the room with crispy audio, but I think that the mids and the highs sound a tad more clear on the iMac Pro because the speakers are facing towards you. And you know what? Because it's the man about tech, I don't know if your last channel was moderator, but I want to know when you're in the chat, even if you're not super chatting. So I'm adding him as a mod. Thank you for the donation. That's not don't think everybody who super chats $10 becomes a mod. But anyway, thanks for the donation. Yeah, essentially, I think all of the iMacs Marquez has reviewed lately have been like the frosted glass 27-inch Intel iMac and the 24-inch iMac, and all of those have just one set of speakers on the bottom, whereas the studio display has speakers on the bottom and the top. So he's probably just comparing it to those and saying, yes, these are the best desktop speakers I've ever heard from Apple. I would love to see him compare it to the iMac Pro. I bet he might change his tune a little bit because that's a very, very underappreciated feature that the iMac Pro had going for it. It had fantastic sound quality. Yeah, you got the blue stick, of course. Studio display is probably like 5% away from just being a computer. Well, naturally, it has to be. If you consider now that we've made this transition to ARM with Apple Silicon has always been one of the more cheaper components of the overall device, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad. That's why Apple will put the A15 chip in an iPhone SE. Is it because the A15 chip is just it's so expensive and powerful, but they just want to provide it at a lower price? It's like no, all of the money you spend um, on Apple Silicon goes towards the research and development phase. Once you're in mass production, once you're cranking out A15 chips, they're like a dime a dozen. They are not an expensive component. I believe I read a report recently that said the A15 chip in the iPhone, not the SE, but just the iPhone 13 in general, is cheaper than the cost of the modems. Just the 5G modems cost more than the actual processor, which does all of the GPU stuff, and it's also way cheaper than the display. So the display and the modems are far more expensive than just the processor single-handedly, and they're not using OLED displays in the Mac line, at least yet. And the Studio display and the iMac, they're just using LCDs. They're not even using mini LED. So the silicon that they include in the monitor or the iMac is probably one of the cheapest components overall because they're already mass producing M1 chips for MacBook Pros, MacBook Airs, and Mac Minis and iPad Pros. By the time they've already been mass producing these chips and they throw it in a computer, yeah, that's a very cheap component. Most of what you're paying for when you buy a 24-inch iMac is the speakers, is the webcam, is the display, is the power supply, is the ports. That's where most of your money is going. You're not spending $500 worth of components on the M1 chip. That's not where your money's going. That's already been mass produced. So the concept that wait a minute, the Studio display costs almost the same price as an iMac. It's just a little bit more than an iMac. It's like because part for part they're pretty dang close. Most of your money is going towards the display, the camera, the speakers, the power supply. What about the iPad Pro one? There's a new one supposed to come out later this year, probably around October. That's all we know about it. Sounds like a waste of time. It'll probably have the M2 chip. How do you become a channel member, Drew? I think it should be the first link in the description. It only works on browsers. So because of Apple's revenue cut thing and YouTube not wanting to share the revenue, you have to, if you want to be a channel member, it's $2 a month. But it's you have to sign up through Safari, which you can do on an iPhone, but it's a lot easier on a desktop. Yeah, I saw this news earlier and was like, is this an early April Fool's joke? No, I think it's legit. I think Apple is probably not seeing the profit margins they wanted with their software services, so they're trying to figure out a way to turn their hardware into more consistent recurring revenue. And I think that turning it into more of a rental service rather than a financing service. The big difference here, for those curious, financing would be you're paying off the iPad monthly or the iPhone monthly, and after 12 or 24 months, you own it outright. So you're paying for it in installments, but you're working towards ownership, whereas Apple would likely be introducing this new hardware plan that Bloomberg is talking about, where you never actually own the device, but they offer more competitive rates so that you feel like you're getting a good deal. So theoretically, this would mean you could get an iPhone or an iPad or a Mac for cheaper than financing it 12 to 24 months. Center stage is doing work for you. It likes to just move around, I know. It's kind of buggy. Let's see. You get an M1 and you get an M1. Right, exactly. Trying to understand why Apple would put a phone chip and OS in the monitor and not a Mac chip in Mac OS. I have to imagine that the A13 chip definitely has a much lower power draw than the M1 chip does. And if they just chucked an M1 chip in there, it would probably need a beefier power supply. They would probably want to give it a better cooling system. I understand that the M1 chip technically can be very powerful even without a cooling system like the MacBook Air, but unfortunately they've already adopted a fairly high-end cooling system for the 24-inch iMac, so to not offer that in the larger one wouldn't really make much sense. But thank you, Andre, for the support. Got the polishing cloth today. Shiny tech. Oh my god, people were waiting on that thing forever. No, I never had any intention on keeping my Mac Studio, so no, I still am not keeping it. iPhones and Apple Watch both need the M1 chip. No, they do not. Don't fight me on that. They definitely do not. Oh my god, don't give them ideas. Apple's listening to these. I hope you guys know that. Let's see. He's a Clubhouse. Got that Clubhouse money exactly. Um, let's see. The funny thing about that is some of his employees use the iMac Pro. I know that they've bought iMac Pros in the past, but do they still use the iMac Pro to this day? I would have thought they would have upgraded by now to Apple Silicon since M1 Pro and M1 Max have proven to be faster. Let's see. I wish Apple would let people use iMacs as a display. I didn't have an iMac, but buying a used one to use as a display for a MacBook would be cool. It's not necessarily a software problem, unfortunately. There are drivers that they bake into the logic board with the 5K iMacs that only work with the soldered in components. So even if Apple wanted to, they couldn't necessarily roll out a software update that allows you to just turn any iMac into an external monitor without some serious compromises. Maybe they could do it if it went down to 1080p or 1440p, but then you would have to compromise on the display resolution quite a bit. So yeah, that would be kind of a tough call. Um, am I keeping the studio display? Basically, I'm gonna review the studio display tomorrow, so I want to save at least some information for that. But the short answer is no. I'll explain why later, but no, I really didn't from the get go intend on keeping it, and using it has been kind of cool, but just the overall cost is hard to justify, and I think that there's more monitors coming, and I don't know necessarily how good they're going to be or what the display specifications are going to be, but I would definitely like to see what Apple has in store later in the year, and if not, then maybe I'll come back to the studio display once I have more information, but I don't want to pull the trigger on a monitor quite yet before I know what's going to happen later. The iMac Pro is in the other bedroom right now. I had it set up for my wife. I want them to release a 14 and 16-inch iPad so the sidecar screen can be the same size as the laptop. Right. So you don't even want an iPad. You just want an external monitor. They have that. Yeah, we still have the iMac Pro. It's not gone. Um, let's see. If the iMac Pro does come back with chips, would it come with? My theory is I think it will come back eventually. I think it's probably not a priority right now because Apple realizes that the mini LED panels they're manufacturing are better or on par with the Pro Display XDR. So if you introduce a new external monitor, with mini LED, um, that has the same specifications of the Pro Display, but now it's cheaper, you could get away with charging probably $2,000, $2,500, or $3,000 for it and still be able to say, hey, this is much cheaper than the last one, right? So it's worth the money. But if you include a whole computer in it, you kind of narrow out your target demographic. And Apple is probably correct that more studios out there and more creatives out there would probably rather use their own monitor to give people that flexibility. So the Mac Studio is probably the crowd pleaser method, even though there's people upset about the upgradability and the drives not being swappable and that kind of thing. There's still people upset about it, but you're probably better off offering the M1 Max chip in a $2,000 machine than you would be offering the M1 Max in a $4,000 or $5,000 machine. So people can plug in their own monitors and customize it to their liking, and they're probably correct that more professionals have leaned more towards modularity these days. So that's a fair assumption, but they want to prioritize the external monitor this year, and then over time, once they've been manufacturing that monitor for a while, I do think they'll eventually make an iMac Pro, but probably with specifications close to that of the Mac Studio. Maybe they won't call it the iMac Pro anymore. Maybe it'll be called the iMac Studio. So because it's catered towards creatives and professionals. My logic would be it would be the same kind of spec options as the Mac Studio. So you would have M1 Max binned in the base option, and because it's a desktop that could probably pull more power, you would have the option to spec it up to an M1 Ultra, and that would probably be like a $9,000 or $10,000 iMac. But they used to sell iMac Pros that were well over $10,000. That was an option they offered. I don't know what the sales were like on that one, if a ton of people bought it or very few people bought it, but it seemed like, at least at the time, there were a ton of people buying it. That may have just been because there wasn't a new Mac Pro yet and everyone was waiting for the Mac Pro, but the Apple Silicon Mac Pro is rumored to come out this year, so that might throw off some of the iMac Pro plans. Do you agree with Marquez when he said that the studio display doesn't complement the new MacBook Pro very well? I would say it complements it probably better than any other monitor. I mean, yes, I agree. The fact that the MacBook Pro is mini LED and the studio display is not, and the MacBook Pro is 120 hertz and the studio display is not. Yes, there's definitely things that could exist in the future that might complement it better, but I don't think he's considering or bringing up the fact that you can't make a 5K 120 hertz display that goes over Thunderbolt. Basically, all of the ports currently existing on the MacBook Pro are Thunderbolt 4, and all of those are going to be limited to 4K at 120 hertz. So even if they do come out with a Pro version of the studio display or a high refresh rate version later in the year, the MacBook will still probably not be able to handle that bandwidth, or if it does, it's going to have to downclock it to 4K, which some people might be annoyed by. I wouldn't mind that personally. I would be happy with a 1440p display that was under 20 hertz, but Apple's not gonna do that. Yeah, I think you're right, Gustavo. Apple won't release the firmware update for the Mac Studio until the return window passes. Yeah, I think they're trying to troll with me. I can't think of another monitor out there that complements the MacBook Pro better. I mean, I definitely like having built-in speakers and the center stage camera. The Pro Display XDR is just so absurdly expensive. I don't know. I don't know if I would count that as a better companion just for the fact that it has XDR. But the Pro Display is not even mini LED, so that doesn't really line up either. I can't, what monitor does match up with the MacBook Pro, really? A lot of people want the 11-inch iPad Pro to be killed off due to it being similar to the Air. I would argue then Apple should kill off the 6.1-inch Pro iPhone. Because honestly, there's more similarities between the iPhone 13 and 13 Pro than there is between the iPad Air and 11-inch iPad Pro. Apple's had success with both of those iPhones. It's kind of proven to be successful. Something I thought Marquez was really right about was making this pricing stepladder where you have an option at every price bracket. So it would probably increase the sales of the iPad Air to make an 11-inch iPad Pro option, but I don't think they're going to continue to have the same silicon chip for very long. It's a temporary thing. Like, the only reason people are saying the iPad Air is so similar to the Pro now is just because they have the same chip. That should not matter with your iPad purchases. The iPad has never been limited by its silicon. It still is not, and it has not been. I still feel like software prohibits the A12X chip in this iPad from being taken advantage of, let alone the M1. That's just absurd speed for an iPad. So I don't see why people would be like, oh, why would I opt for a Pro? It's like, were people opting for the Pro because of the M1? Oh, I could get the iPad Air, but it's just the A14 chip. Oh, that's so slow. I can't do anything on the iPad Air 4 because the A14 is so slow. If only I had the M1, I could do... No one says that. No one says... It's an iPad. It can do the light video editing. It can do media consumption. It can do photo editing. Like, the Air does it, the Pro does it. The biggest difference is 120 hertz and the biometric. Those are still the largest differences, and there's still present differences. The iPad Pro has got ProMotion, it's got Face ID. The iPad Air has got Touch ID, it's got 60 hertz. iPad Pro display is a little bit bigger. It's got better cameras. It's got LiDAR. It's features that most people don't really need, but if you're going to take the argument of don't really need, then that's why the budget iPad sells so well. Hey, thanks, Alpha, for your support. I would appreciate a 24-inch Air display with 4K for the basic tilt adjustment stand for $1,000. Nail this and miss that. What the heck? Oh, man. Apple won't release... Oh, sorry, I read that. Yeah, I don't know if they would call it an Air display, but I certainly think Apple intentionally goes a little bit overkill on certain specs so that you cannot equally match it with third-party monitors. There won't be another monitor that has the exact same bells and whistles that the studio display has for cheaper. But if you're willing to compromise a little bit, like, okay, let's leave out center stage or let's leave out 5K for 4K, Then you'll be able to find another monitor very similar for a fraction of the price, but that's why Apple just goes a little bit further. I don't think my iPad would need to be more powerful than my MacBook Pro. I don't either. I'm not in favor of iPads getting faster silicon until they change iPadOS at all. Um, and by faster, I mean faster than the A12X. I personally think right now there's very little point in giving the iPad the M1 chip. And I'm not saying don't give it the M1 chip. I'm saying improve the software first. Don't, because the A12X chip I don't feel like is properly utilized, to be honest. Um, at a certain point, Apple can't keep bragging about the speed of their chips and focus more on specific features because they can only get so fast. I would have made that argument years ago. I think they're going to keep going. I personally believe the new iPad Pro will come out with an M2 chip later in the year, and the argument will be overhead, right? Well, in the future, you want to have some overhead for better GPU and CPU features. It's like, how much freaking overhead do you really need before you acknowledge that the hardware is absurdly overkill and will never be useful? My iPad Pro is almost 4 years old now, and they still have not really done much with it to make the A12X chip useful. Why can't Apple just put 90 hertz on the 14 and 14 Max? They probably could, but they know the demographic that buys the 14 won't notice the difference between 60 and 90. And it's not worth the money because most people in that demographic wouldn't appreciate it. And the people who do notice high refresh rate would rather have 120. So might as well put 120 on the Pros and 60 on the entry models because that's what people are used to. Wonder if Apple is keeping the new 14 and 14 Max similar to the 13 to create a bigger diversity between them and the Pros and to keep them at the 730 and 830 prices that the current Mini and 13 are. Is keeping the new 14 similar to... Yeah, I think that the thought process from the beginning has always been to have an option at every price category. If someone wants to spend $700, here's what you get. If someone wants to spend $800, here's what you get. So they'll continue to have that, and I do think the 13 and 13 Mini will go down $100 in September, just like the 12 did. Yeah, so they'll keep them around. I think the iPhone 11 will be discontinued this year, but the 12 and 12 Mini will continue to sell pretty dang well because they'll be $100 cheaper. It's like trying to market a race car to the average car buyer. Yeah, no, it won't work. I honestly don't even know what Apple could do with iPadOS 16 at this point. I know a billion things they could do to make it better, but I don't expect them to do it anymore because after last year, I kind of gave up all hope on iPadOS getting more practical and gaining more Mac features. All they want to do to iPadOS is give it more iOS features. But still not all of them, because there's no calculator or weather app. So they're always like, yeah, multitasking, and now you can put widgets anywhere. It's like, we don't want the iPad to become more like the iPhone. We want the iPad to become more like the Mac. But every single year, we say the same exact stuff. I remember back in 2018, we were all saying, A12X chip is so fast, we just got to wait until there's software that can actually take advantage of this power and hope for better multitasking or better file management systems, and then it just doesn't happen. Now they're giving it M1, and now later this year they'll probably give it the M2, and it'll still be the same, wow, that's really fast, but I hope the software comes along to make it useful. It's like, it's not coming. I don't know how many years we have to keep hoping for it, but what if I want to spend $3,000 on an iPhone? Apple catch up, Samsung offers phones at that price. Yeah, I mean, that's why I don't think it would be a horrible business decision for them to try to make their own foldable. They would probably get the software of a foldable better than anyone, but I imagine the number of people who would actually pay that is fairly low. iPad calculator can be Scribble, but for numbers. It doesn't need to be Scribble, just a calculator. What is so complicated about just having a calculator app? It doesn't need to be this big, like, oh, we don't know how to do it right on a big screen and we want to do something special. It's like, Apple, just throw in an app. It doesn't have to take advantage of the whole display in a perfect way. You could do like picture-in-picture except with a calculator. I've seen so much concept art. It's so simple. How about we make software or an app that can take advantage? Well, we've tried. LumaFusion does the best they can, but they're always kind of fundamentally limited by what iPadOS allows them to do. And file management systems and drag and drop and how the Files app works. It's like, they could try, but at the end of the day, there's still not legitimate external monitor support. It's basically just screen mirroring, which fundamentally limits it a ton. Recurring theme of Tailosive Tech. Buy a refurbished 2018 iPad Pro. The reason I say that is because that's the one I use. I've reviewed the new iPad Pros. I reviewed the 2020 models and I reviewed the 2021 models. And I went back to this and I did not feel like I was missing out on anything. Uh, okay, there's center stage here and there, there's mini LED here and there, but the differences are so small they're not worth the upgrade to me. I would not spend extra money just to get mini LED or center stage on my iPad. I could actually justify center stage a lot easier on a Mac because I live stream from the Mac, whereas it's because of the software and because of the app situation on iPad, I can't really do my live streaming off of that. You can spend $3,000 on an iPhone. I have one I can sell. Oh, there you go. Do graphing calculator or a scientific one. Why is this so hard? I know, right? And if you download a third-party app for the iPad as a calculator, you got to deal with ads, or they got to upsell you. You got to pay money for the calculator, or they got to have a monthly subscription or a pro feature that they want you to unlock. So you got to deal with these pop-ups to support the developer who's trying to make a buck, which I get, but it's such a standard thing. I advocate for it when someone mentions an iPad Pro. Well, I always advocate for it because in the certified refurbished section, to this day, they still sell iPad Pros for $500. And I have yet to find any tablet from Apple or Best Buy or Samsung, any tablet out there that's offered a better value than a $500 2018 iPad Pro. That is such an astoundingly good deal. That's a solid product, great biometrics, great camera, great display, great OS for the basics, for what iPadOS is good for, which is, the media consumption, whether it's social media, checking email, watching YouTube, the speaker system, Face ID, banking, the basic stuff iPads have always been good at. The iPad Pro is perfect. It's the 2018 Pro specifically. The solution they give is to use Siri. Oh, God. Right, just use Siri every time you want to do math calculations. Great. Just so that she can tell me. I didn't quite get that. If Apple gave the 14 and 14 Max the A16, the 48 megapixel camera, and a new design, they would have to start it at $830 and $930, which is only $70 cheaper than the 14 Pro, so dumping the mini but keeping $730. Well, I think the mini iPhones have likely just not sold well in the first place, but having a price point at $900 might convince a lot of people, especially if it's $930, like you said, might convince a lot of people to just opt for the Pro because they feel like they're so close. Like, I personally thought the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro were way too similar. The only differences between the 12 and 12 Pro, 2 gigs of RAM, telephoto lens, LiDAR, and 128 gigs starting instead of 64. Same exact display, very few differences with the display. I think the Pro was like a tiny bit brighter, but you would not notice. Same front-facing camera, both had biometric, both had OLED, both had Lightning, aluminum chassis versus steel chassis. I thought there's no way anyone's going to buy the 12 Pro because iPhone 12 is just way too similar and it's way too good a deal. Turned out the 12 Pro ended up selling really, really well. And I think something similar will happen if Apple prices a 14 Max to be very close to that of a 14 Pro. Everyone will be like, well, the Pro's only $70 away. I'm just going to get the Pro at that point. So they justify people spending more money on their phone, which is ultimately what Apple wants. They want you to buy the most expensive one. Do you think they should make an iPhone Mini Pro? Should is a totally different question. Yes, I'm all in favor of options. I want a mini iPhone to continue to exist, of whether it's Pro or not. I just wish they would make a 14 Mini. I don't personally think they will, likely because the Minis haven't sold that great, and they could probably justify getting more money out of people if they included a larger size to the entry-level iPhone instead of a smaller one. Because then you're going to get a lot of people that are like, well, I won't get a Pro, but this Max option I really like. I can justify spending a bit more because it's cheaper than a Pro iPhone, but I'm still getting a big screen. So YJC says, I recently paid $14.99 one-time purchase for Jump Desktop so that my 12.9-inch iPad with Magic Keyboard with trackpad can remote into my 24-inch iMac, and it's so much more useful than iPadOS. Well, that's good. I guess if you have a Mac, you can control it that way. Siri annoys me, especially on my iPod Touch. What? Mike, we cannot have iPod Touches in here. That is unacceptable. Have there been any more rumors about that 5.7-inch SE4? Not since I reported on it. There was just that one, and then that was it. I haven't heard anyone else agree on that, so I question the validity of it. Ross Young said that was just one of a couple prototypes they were working on, but I'm on the 12 Pro because I just don't like Max or Plus phones. Right, we understand the 6.1-inch form factor, but I'm saying, why did people go with the 12 Pro instead of the 12? Well, because they found out they were willing to opt a little bit extra money for a few minor upgrades, which is probably what will continue to happen with the 14 lineup. The SE will eventually reuse the Mini's body, hence why Apple is discontinuing the Mini, just a speculation. I think it's basically already there, because later this year they will probably discount the price of the current 12 Mini another $100, and then it'll basically be $500. They could sit it around that for another year. Maybe if they get OLED panels cheap enough. I think the main reason you can't do a 12 mini at $399, first of all, iPhone SE has already gone up in price. Even the iPhone 8 looking design, the SE3, that's $429. And that's using dated manufacturing techniques, and that's using old iPhones. But the 12 mini has the 5G modems with ultra wideband, which is more expensive than the SE3, which doesn't have ultra wideband. And the OLED display is the most expensive component in that entire device. So getting that down to $429, I think, is going to be a little bit more challenging. But if what you want is an iPhone SE with an OLED display, 12 mini, that's basically it, especially in September when they discount the price again. Hey, Lord Zero, welcome to the stream. New iPod Touch with Face ID would be cool, but iPhone mini probably ruined that dream. I don't think people actually want an iPod Touch with Face ID. I think what you want is a cheaper version of the iPhone 12 mini. Because the reason people like the iPod Touch is because it's so cheap. If you made it better, if you improved the hardware and you gave it Face ID and you gave it OLED, it would not be $199. It would be about $499, which is what the iPhone 12 mini is going to cost in a few months. Don't you think it's inevitable that Apple puts an M1 Lite, at least in the iPhone? I don't think it's quite inevitable, because I think the power draw of iPhone CPUs is quite fundamentally different from iPad and Mac CPUs. For the same reason Apple never put, A12X or A12Z, they never put those chips in an iPhone or a entry-level iPad or that kind of thing. I'm not quite convinced that the power draw of an iPhone will ever get to the same scale of an M1 or a Lite M2 or something like that. I think that Apple will probably keep separate series of chips going. They've shown they're comfortable having multiple different versions of silicon. Like before, they had the W1 chip, which they put in the Apple Watch and the AirPods, and then later decided that the H1 chip was better optimized for headphones. So they switched the AirPods to the H1, whereas the Apple Watch kept using the W series. Or when did it switch to the S series? At some point, they switched to S5, S6. So they didn't just try to have one size fits all for all wearables. They were like, no, this one makes more sense for a watch. This one makes more sense for headphones. I think it'll be similar with an iPhone because, frankly, the iPhone doesn't need that many cores, that many GPU cores. And battery life wise, you're always going to be better off just having more efficient cores. So I think the iPhone and the entry level iPad will just continue to sport a series of chips because that'll make the most amount of sense for that market. And they'll reserve the M1 for higher end iPads and Macs. Would you like an iPad Pro Ultra with an A16? Wait, why A16? M1 would be faster. Basically, I'm not in favor of any new iPad hardware until iPadOS can catch up. Like, yes, I would love a larger iPad if iPadOS gained more macOS functionality, but it hasn't yet. And yeah, I would have no problem with the iPad Pro getting an M1 Pro, M1 Max. Heck, if one day they found out how to put an M1 Ultra in the iPad, I'd be all in favor of it if the software was there. If the iPadOS system remains the way it is, where they just grab a few iOS features every year and that's it, then no, I don't see the point in making larger iPads or more expensive iPads or higher end iPads. Like, if my iPad could do everything my Mac could do, then yes, I would want a 16-inch iPad, and I would be willing to spend five, six, $7,000 on that iPad if it could actually do everything my Mac can. But that's not currently possible. Um, which iPhone is your favorite in hand and usability? Um, well, I mean, I definitely like in terms of just favorite overall. I love my 13 Pro Max because it's 120 hertz, and I've wanted that on my iPhone ever since I saw 120 hertz. Um, but in terms of just what feels the most comfortable in the hand, probably the iPhone 11. Just the rounded chassis doesn't cut into your hand as much, and probably the iPhone 10 because that was even smaller than the iPhone 11, huh? Yeah, the iPhone 10 had the rounded chassis and it was fairly compact. Kind of annoyed that they got rid of the 5.8-inch form factor. Um, so something kind of like that. Maybe the new iPhone SE that they come out with next year, if that's 5.7 inches and it has a rounded chassis, that would be very comfortable. That would be great for one-handed use. How long do you think the 2018 iPad Pro will be supported for? So far, they seem to just keep extending the number of years iPads get of support as the silicon has improved. So I thought the iPad Air 2 got like 7 years. So I wouldn't be shocked if the 2018 iPad Pro got like 8 or 9 years of support because the A12X chip is still very capable for what it is. I think that the M1 chip and the M1 Pro and M1 Max have made everyone think that the A12X is slow. But in reality, for what you use an iPad for, like I edited an entire tech video with my iPad Pro from 2018 with LumaFusion. Once they rolled out the update to give it ProRes support, I threw my Blackmagic footage on there. I edited the whole thing and I exported it, and it was plenty fast. That's with 4 gigs of RAM and a CPU from 4 years ago, and it did great. It exported plenty fast. I think the flat-edged iPhones look better, but the rounded-edge iPhones feel more comfortable. Um, yeah, Apple heard Drew and makes 32-inch Apple Watches. That would be great. Just a giant round display, 32 inches across. What time is it? Now, if you ask what's pro about iPadOS, that's a different thing. But the actual iPad Pro, to me, has pro-level hardware. Yes, the hardware has been pro-level for many years. Guys, don't forget, the iPads were the first devices to get ProMotion. iPads had ProMotion in 2017. No other Apple device had ProMotion until 2021. Can you believe that? iPads were literally the only devices with Apple Pencil support. They still are with ProMotion. They're still, to this day, the only Apple hardware with Face ID that works in multiple orientations. Still, iPhones can't do Face ID sideways, but iPads can. Also, iPads were the first devices to switch from Lightning to USB-C. No other Apple device did that. They have Thunderbolt. They were the first device to get mini LED. Before any other Apple product, they gave the iPad mini LED. So yeah, the hardware has been there. The hardware has been pro level on iPads for years. It's just we've been waiting for years and years and years for the software to catch up, and it hasn't. So it's not there. I don't know why, but my iPad Air 3 chugs sometimes with basic stuff, and sometimes it's fine. Yeah, it's just kind of natural with hardware. It gets old over time. Anyone here not impressed with the potential iPhone Pro Max 14 and iOS who is now switching to Android, if any? I haven't heard that many people. I feel like most people are fairly comfortable in the platform at this point that they have. If you're on Android, you're probably going to keep being on Android. If you're on iOS, you're probably going to keep being on iOS. I'm kind of surprised when I hear that there's people still going back and forth. If the iPhone SE 1 is discontinued for iOS 16, the iPod might get discontinued because Apple will not optimize iOS for a 4-inch display. That, and it runs the A10 chip, which is getting pretty old already. So, yeah, I mean, what version of iOS are we on? I can't even remember. Are we on 15? I guess 16 hasn't come out yet, huh? Man, it's so hard to keep track of all these names. Yes, we're on iOS 15. So I think there's probably a decent chance iOS 16 kills off the iPod just because it's the only 4-inch device, and Apple hasn't done anything with the iPod Touch for over 3 years now. So if you're going to kill it, now would be the time. They've definitely buried the iPod Touch in the website. Like they're selling it, but like just barely. You have to really know where it is. They're definitely not advertising it in any way, shape, or form. You have to click this one tiny little link at the bottom of Apple's website to find it. Yeah, we're on 15. Um, the Apple Watch battery sucks. Do you charge yours every night? Mine doesn't suck. I can get over 2 days on a single charge, which I have done. Although I don't have the always on display on, I just didn't find it very useful, so I get more battery life that way. But usually I end the day with my watch around 70% or so. Um, but yeah, it's like the watch recharges when you do. Most people don't stay awake for days at a time, so when you go to sleep, charge the watch. And if you care about sleep tracking, then you charge it when you're in the shower. Charge it for, they improved the fast charging capability on the Series 7. So charge it before bed, charge it in the morning. It's the most popular watch in the world. People have obviously made do with the battery life that it is. It would be nice if it was better, but I don't think people understand that there's not like a clear and obvious way for them to make the Apple Watch battery that much better. Like in teardowns, the physical capacity is practically at the highest amount it can really be. They can't just stuff a bigger battery in there without making the watch substantially thicker, which I don't think anybody would want anyway. So it would make it ugly, and it would make it uncomfortable, and it would make watch bands not work as easily. So Apple has some of the most power efficient silicon in the world, and they're trying to get the power consumption as low as they can with the Apple Watch, and this is still the best they got. So I don't think there's like an obvious solution. There are other smartwatches out there that get much better battery life, but it always comes at the cost of the performance. The graphics aren't as good. The apps don't load as quickly, and it's not as responsive, or it's more prone to hanging, or when there's a software update, it's frozen for much, much longer. So it would compromise quite a bit. For those of us who like Apple Watch in the shower, that's me. I wear my watch in the shower, but just you gotta pick a 1 hour time in the day. Honestly, the Apple Watch battery is pretty small. It doesn't take that long to charge. You can't wait for Apple Watch 8? Well, good. I hope you enjoy it. I don't think it's gonna be that different, to be honest. But let's see. I want a 10-inch AirTag, then I will never lose it. Instead of the speaker on the AirTag, you make the AirTag so big there's no way you could possibly misplace it. Thoughts on Samsung supplying the under display tech for Apple? Makes sense. I think anybody could have saw that coming from a mile away. That this technology that only a handful of Androids are using will eventually get mass produced at a high enough volume that other people will buy it. Yeah, it makes sense. Apple, ever since they've shrunk the notch on the iPhone 13, I think it's been pretty clear that they probably want to get rid of it eventually. They just need to take their time with it so that they can upsell people on noticeable design changes year over year. So, hey, not just smaller on the 13. Hey, now it's just a camera cutout on the 14. Hey, it's just a single camera cutout. Hey, on the 16, now it's gone completely. So they have lots of room for upsell in the future. Thank you for the super chat, Bill Castle. Appreciate that. He says, I have the iPad Air 4 with 256 gigs of storage. I'm thinking of trading it in for the new iPad Air 5 with 64 gigs. Am I nuts? Yes, Bill, you're completely nuts. No, obviously, it's your money. You can do what you want with it. I mean, I don't know the context of the situation. How much storage have you used on your iPad Air 4? If you've used like 32 gigs, okay, then sure, that sounds like a decent upgrade if you care about center stage. But let me think. Do you care about 5G? Do you want your iPad Air to have 5G? Like, are you the type of person that doesn't want to use their phone's hotspot, which is probably way cheaper, and you're willing to have a monthly fee on your iPad just so that you can use cellular data when Wi-Fi is not available? If you don't care about center stage, which is what I'm using right now, where the webcam tracks around with you and can, scale if more people enter the room. If you don't care about center stage or 5G, I would say don't bother. The difference between the M1 chip and the A14 chip will make a difference on Geekbench tests, but with how you use your iPad, no, I'm not. Sorry, I've used an iPad with the M1 chip, and I've used an iPad with the A12 chip, and the difference is so small for what people use iPads for. Like, it's not going to make a huge difference. So, I don't know how much storage you use, but if those two features do not sound interesting to you, then don't bother. Those are really, in my opinion, the only reason you should consider an Air 5. If I were you, I would try to sell your iPad Air 4 because you'll probably get more money if you sell it versus trading it in, and get a certified refurbished iPad Pro, which I would consider an upgrade in my opinion. And you could get it for less money than the iPad Air 5, which starts at 600. Certified refurbished iPad Pro would be 520. And you'd get 120 hertz and you get Face ID. I'd consider that an upgrade personally. Bossy Pine, that's a name. He says, as someone who's coming into the ecosystem for the first time, I'm going to get everything new. So an iPhone 14 Pro, iPad Pro 2022, new AirPods Pro, Apple Watch Series 8, and a new MacBook Pro. Jeez. Rest in peace to Bossy Pine's bank account. I hope he's okay. By the end of this, he's going to be $10,000 poorer. Apple Watch has gotten really boring over the last 3 years. I think it was kind of inevitable, though. The thing is, you can only refine and you can only improve a product so much before it's kind of reached its max potential. I think the Apple Watch has reached that, and I think the iPhone and the iPad have reached that, unless they wanted to turn the iPad into more of a two-in-one and provide more software for it. But in the meantime, yeah, like iPhones are already kind of just running out of new things, running out of exciting features, which is why I'm investing more of my time and money into EV, because I think the EV sector is a lot more interesting than the smartphone sector. But yeah, the Apple Watch can only do so much. It's a watch at the end of the day. You use it for communication. You use it for the time. You use it for notifications. You use it for workouts. They can only stuff so many health sensors in this thing. They can only stuff such big batteries, such a big display. So it's increasingly difficult to come up with interesting features to compel people to upgrade. And I don't think at the end of the day, Apple expects people to upgrade year over year. I think they would rather you upgrade every once in a while. Well, they're fine if you want to upgrade every year, but they expect that most consumers are just going to buy an Apple product and hold on to it for 2 or 3 years, which is, I think, why, to kind of tie this all back into the title of this live stream, the logic of Apple trying to come up with monthly subscription services for Apple hardware is that it will come across as a better deal, but it will encourage people to upgrade every certain number of years. And they know that trying to convince people, hey, you should buy a $400 or $500 Apple Watch, or hey, you should go out and buy a $1,000 iPhone, is going to be a much harder decision, because iPhones and Apple Watches are going to have smaller and smaller changes year over year, than telling people, hey, you should change your subscription from $25 a month to $30 a month and get such and such new hardware. Then you'll get a slightly better camera, a slightly better display, and you'll get a new battery, and it won't even be that big a difference. We're talking about $5 a month for you to have the latest generation technology. That is going to be a much easier upsell for people. And then Apple can turn around and take their old iPhone and refurbish it and sell that, or they can have more control. And because you're not putting equity into the hardware and you're just paying for the access of using it, I expect that they would offer pricing probably lower than what the Apple Card financing options are, with 0% APR. So right now, let's play around with the website a little bit. I just have the website open on my iPad. It's a nice, clean example. So the iPhone 13 Pro is $1,000, right? Fairly simple. Apple offers the alternative, like, hey, if you have the Apple Card, you can pay $41 a month for 24 months. And that won't have any interest. So you'll carry a bit of debt, but because you're on the Apple Card, they're okay with it, because they're like, we know you'll eventually pay it off. And if there is interest charges, we're the ones, if there were interest charges, we're the ones who'd be getting that anyway. So regardless, that's what they offer for you to eventually own the iPhone outright. If they aren't letting you own the iPhone outright and you're just paying a monthly fee to use the hardware, but you're never actually going to own it, they'll probably justify offering it at a lower price. Either now you can get the iPhone 13 Pro for $35 a month, or try to incentivize the overall package. So now, let's say if you want the iPhone 13 Pro or 14 Pro, You just pay $40 a month and we'll give you Apple One. So you'll get Apple Music, you'll get Apple TV Plus, and you'll get extra iCloud storage. All part of this one monthly fee that includes the hardware and the services in one package. So you don't have to track like how much am I paying for TV Plus, how much am I paying for Apple Music. They just bundle all of this together, and then they get the hardware at the end of the day. But that the reason they would be comfortable charging less than the financing options is because theoretically, if you decide I'm happy with the iPhone 14 Pro, I don't need to upgrade to the 15 or 16 Pro or whatever, people will just continue paying for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, paying $40 a month or $30 a month. You want to get all those little expenses out of the way and just let people think about the Apple ecosystem experience. It's not an upfront cost. It's just, this is what it costs per month for you to enjoy Apple hardware and software together. Thank you for the super chat, Owen. He says, why hasn't Apple put the front-facing camera and sensors on the top landscape side of the iPad? They probably could. Front-facing camera and sensors. Oh, I see what you're asking. Okay. The main reason is because of this. On that part of the iPad, there is an inductive charge pad for the Apple Pencil that allows you to magnetically attach it like this, and it emits a charge. So if you've seen teardowns on iPad Airs and iPad Pros, this is not a thin plate. There's some stuff going on behind that inductive charge connector, and you cannot easily just pick up all these cameras and sensors and stuff them in that part without having to relocate this inductive charge section. And there's not really a great way to move it, because this is the biggest iPad. So this issue becomes even harder on the iPad Air and 11-inch iPad Pro. But if you put the Apple Pencil here, you're covering up speakers and microphones, which is not great. So, okay, maybe move it here. But now if you move the speakers up here, now you've got volume buttons. So I guess you got to move the volume buttons to the side as well. Wait a minute. If there's volume buttons there, where does the pencil go? So there's not a great solution. If you put the Apple Pencil on this side, that's where the charge port is. So it can't cover that up, obviously. Basically, you can't put it on the bottom because that's where the iPad rests. That's where it's going to be sitting. So essentially, in order to have a nice, clean stylus that you just snap to the side magnetically, that's kind of the best way to do it. So I agree, it would be very, very nice if they found a way to re-engineer that. Maybe if they came up with a magnetic way of like the inductive chargers being off to the side of the center, or, you know, it's kind of asymmetrical, so Apple probably wouldn't be for it. But maybe if they were willing to put the camera in the top corner so that it's, you know, a bit more out of the way than on the side, so that, you know, whenever you pick up your iPad, your thumb can kind of cover up the cameras. So there's not a great solution. You know, Samsung Tab Ultra even has a notch cut out because they can't fit the cameras up there, but they can move the inductive charge to the back like Samsung. That would be great placement. Right. Just stuff the pen behind the tablet. Drew, my brother just got an M1 iPad 11-inch for $300. Well, hey, that's a good deal. If you can get it for cheaper than the refurbished iPad Pro, then, I mean, yeah, go for it. Doesn't change the fact that the M1 is overkill, but kill the port, add inductive charging for the iPad. Oh, great. You know, I'm a fan of MagSafe, but I just have not figured out a great way to include MagSafe charging on an iPad. I can't imagine a way it would be practical. You hold your phone with one hand. So at the end of the day, I drop my phone on MagSafe Duo. I don't hold my iPad with one hand. I hold it like this. At the end of the day, if there was a MagSafe pad, I would have to line it up exactly right, and I would have to take the case off, or they would have to sell new cases, so we all got to spend another $100 or another $300 on keyboard cases just so they support MagSafe. And because the device is so large, it would be much, much harder to align with the magnetic ring. I don't see an easy or simple way to add inductive charging. I think Thunderbolt is fine on the iPad. That's a decent way of doing it. I guess I wouldn't be completely against them doing MagSafe 3, this type of MagSafe on the iPad, but that doesn't really solve your problem if you're saying get rid of the port, because this type of MagSafe kind of still has a port anyway. So yeah, just do over-the-air charging. Let's see. Oh, $300 on Facebook. Gotcha. Yeah, you can buy stuff used if you're willing to get used. I mean, yeah, you can find all sorts of deals. You could probably find a 2018 iPad Pro for cheaper. An iPad Mini with slightly thinner bezels, M1, better iPadOS, Face ID, basically a Mini Pro, but for the iPads would be cool. It's fun to dream. I honestly really wish I could convert an iPad into doing everything a phone could. Like, I want to be able to pair my Apple Watch with an iPad and get a SMS cell plan and everything on an iPad, but you can't because they don't let it do that. But I could fit the iPad Mini in my pocket. No joke. It would fit in my jeans pocket. I was like, look, if they gave it 120 hertz and they upped the camera quality, I do care about my iPhone's camera performance. If they basically just made an 8.3-inch iPhone with split screen multitasking with the 4 by not 4 by 3, but the wider aspect ratio and all that, but I could use it with my watch and I could use it with Mint Mobile just like I do with my phone, I would be down. I will do that if they allow for it. I won't. I'm not kidding on that one. If they brought the Pro Max cameras. Oh, thanks for the super chat, Alpha. Guess what did he say? Guess we're needing to wait for the next big thing. I think the next big thing is EVs, and I think Apple missed the beat on that, and that's probably the biggest missed opportunity their company will ever face. I can't think of another market Apple could have had a bigger influence in than the automotive market. Like, I don't think the gaming market is as profitable as people make it out to be. The AAA gaming market, but Apple already makes billions of dollars through mobile gaming. I don't think they need to mess around with PC gaming because honestly, there's not much money to be made there relative to what Apple makes already. Um, and it's like I want Apple to make a dedicated camera because I think there is a lot of overlap with that. Like Mac users and AAA gaming, I don't think there's a ton of overlap for. I'm sure there's a little bit, but not that much. Whereas a lot of people buying Mac computers probably are photographers and videographers. So if Apple made a dedicated camera that had like, interchangeable lenses and a full-size sensor, but also all of the great computational features that an iPhone has with deep fusion and night mode, and gave it Apple Silicon, and you could airdrop footage and files off of your camera to a computer. I think that would overlap a lot with the Mac user base. So if someone was willing to spend $7,000 on their Mac, they'll probably be willing to spend $3,000 on their Apple camera, and there could be a bunch of integrated features of like the camera has Thunderbolt, so you can plug it in directly to your Mac and record high resolution HDR, high bitrate footage directly into your Final Cut Pro timeline, and there would be a ton of Mac users willing to do that, as Apple's already said with the Studio. Photographers and videographers use a lot of cameras, so I think I think that market would probably overlap a lot more than most Mac users are just not into PC gaming or upgradability. The PC gamers are more into modularity and building their machines and having control over that. And Apple's never been into that, which is why I don't believe, even if Apple bought up a bunch of gaming companies or exclusive game titles and tried to bring them to the Mac, they would probably not get that much attention. They would likely not get a bunch of revenue through that because most Mac users are like, no thanks, I use my Mac for video production or Photoshop and that kind of thing. Apple Camera syncs right in iCloud Photos, no need for AirDrop. iCloud Photos depends on your speed of internet. So if people are out at a wedding taking pictures, or if people are out in the field filming videos and that kind of thing, if you don't have Wi-Fi, then it won't back up to iCloud Photos. AirDrop works regardless. You don't need internet for AirDrop to work. Also, AirDrop is much, much faster. iCloud Photos is going to be dependent on how fast your upload speed is, whereas AirDrop works the same speed whether you're at home or in the middle of the desert, or the AirDrop works in space. You could be on the space station, AirDrop would still work. Yeah, I think the Apple camera would be really popular, but as far as the next big thing, none of those things, gaming, camera, the Apple banking, Apple services, or Apple crypto, like Mike said, none of those things I think would have been as much of a market disruptor as an Apple car, and I think they've missed the time to enter. Market's already grown so fast, and it's already so saturated. Best case scenario, Apple will probably partner with Porsche or something, and Apple will just make some kind of like enhanced version of CarPlay where you have HVAC controls, and the in-car navigation can account for your range and your charge state, and the windows, and maybe some security features. For the most part, that's the best case scenario of Apple Car. Um, I don't think Apple's going to make their own physical car. Tesla's in Texas. Drew, hopefully this isn't too personal, but your psoriasis is completely unnoticeable lately. You look great. Thank you. It's costing us a pretty penny, but in case anyone's wondering, what is Drew doing with all this super chat? Most of it is not most of it, but a decent chunk of it. Wait, is it most of it? No, not most of it, but a very decent chunk goes to our health insurance, which unfortunately is not very cheap in America. Um, and with health insurance and dermatologist visits, they've got me on this prescription, which is very, very difficult to order refills for. Pretty much every time I order a refill, I have to do something different, and I have to talk. I was talking on the phone with my pharmacy for like an hour yesterday, just trying to explain to them I've already been prescribed this medication. I've been using this medication for 2 years. Basically, in case you weren't aware, now it's near the end of the stream. I'm okay getting personal. You guys are super chatting. I should tell you what this money's used for. Basically, they're shots. They're two like EpiPen looking things, and I have to put. I can inject myself, luckily, so I don't have to go to the doctors. But this medication shows up in the mail. You have to keep it refrigerated. It's very cold, and then you take it out of the fridge for 15 minutes. And you wait. I have another package coming on Monday. I should get my next order. It's called Cosentix, and I have to hit my either my upper thigh or my belly with this medication once a month, or they encourage you to do it every 4 weeks. But I've typically done it once a month. So once, and then you stop, and then you do it again, and then you do that every 4 weeks, basically forever. And then I don't look as psoriasis like. So that's why my hands don't look all flaky like they used to, and the red patches on my forehead went away. And it was getting really bad back in 2019 before I got on this medication. It was like growing across my eyebrows and my eyelids, and it would start to crack and bleed. And I know people noticed it. People would comment on it on like every video. I didn't mind people commenting on it. It was just distracting when it was like, I'm trying to talk about this new Apple product or this new feature, and I'm trying to talk about tech-related things, but everyone just wanted to talk about how my face looked all patchy. So that's why I'm willing to put up with all the medication and the insurance and the pharmacies. And no, you can't decrease the dosage. That would lower the effectiveness of it. But I've asked my dermatologist, I was like, what happens if I stopped taking it? And the reason I'm afraid to stop taking it is because he said sometimes it won't come back, but there are a lot of cases where it does come back and then the medication won't work anymore. So once you get off the medication, if psoriasis returns, there won't be an easy way to get rid of it. Or at least a very clear way to get rid of it. Psoriasis, a lot of people have it. Certain things work for certain people and not others. Like dieting works for some and not others. Certain creams and medication work and not others. It's been 2 years since you posted that vlog taking the medication. I think it's close to 2 years. I believe that was 2020. And I think it was around summer of 2020 when I got on that medication. But yeah, it didn't let me use Touch ID. So I couldn't use fingerprint readers because my hand was all scaly and flaky. So I appreciate you guys supporting the channel and super chatting, because the health insurance and the doctor's visits are not the cheapest thing in the world, unfortunately. I wish I could say if we moved to another country with free healthcare it would be cheaper, but unfortunately all the countries with free healthcare have far higher tax rates. So I can either pay a lot for health insurance and be close to friends and family, or I can be far away from friends and family and pay a lot in taxes and nothing in health insurance. So there's not really a clear, obvious solution that would make it easy. Why is there always problem at refill? And you just answered my follow-up question. I thought it was a one-off. No, it's never been one-off. Pretty much since the beginning, they've said you get on it and then you stay on it for life. Hopefully I grow out of it. It's nasty. It's itchy, and I'm very glad to not have it anymore. Well, I still technically have it, but the side effects are basically non-existent. So I appreciate you guys just for watching. I hope the people tuning into this stream understand that even if you're not super chatting, um, most of my channel revenue just comes from people like you guys who either have YouTube Premium, or even if you're putting up with the ads, that helps me out a ton. That allows me to interact with you guys and continue to make videos that hopefully you find entertaining and interesting. And it helps me afford, to live. I can say fairly comfortably. I mean, I'm not super filthy rich. We live in a, fairly modest house, and we have budgets that we keep things to, and we don't buy expensive luxury clothes. And yeah, I review expensive tech products for the channel and for the business, but um, that's that's where most of our money is spent, is on things for the channel and for YouTube. It's not We're not blowing a bunch of money on things for outside of that. Yeah, any skin disease is a pain to deal with. So um, it's only $42.50 to buy Cosmetics in Australia. Getting there and becoming a citizen there, that's a whole different discussion. And the tax rate in Australia is a different discussion. But um, I'm using the center stage camera on the studio display. Do you have to be careful since it's immunosuppressant? I was curious about that. I was asking my dermatologist, like, is it bad if should I be careful about the vaccine? And he was like, nah, just space it out. So he was like, take your Cosentix dosage and then wait 2 weeks and then get vaccinated, and then I should be good. So yeah, it is a immunosuppressant, but I haven't had any issues. I've actually gotten less sick in the past 2 years. But I've traveled a lot. I went to Puerto Rico. I got a little bit of a cold there, but our friend got tested. It was not COVID. I did not get COVID. I never got COVID, at least knowingly. I may have been asymptomatic, but yeah, I got sick there, and I was a little sneezy, and my throat was sore for a few days, and then I made a full recovery. So it doesn't ruin your immune system to the point that, like, you could die from something simple. It's kind of a mild suppressant. Do you still watch traditional TV? I've never had cable TV growing up, and I've never liked cable TV. We pretty much watch all streaming services. We watch Peacock. Uh, we watch Psych a lot on Peacock, and we've been going through Frasier. That's something I forgot to mention. My T-Mobile internet includes Paramount Plus, which is kind of cool, for free. It's the ad version, but unfortunately, Paramount Plus does not want to load on our TV at all. So it won't run on the TV, but we do watch it on the iPad quite a bit. Frasier's an amazing show. So they're older shows that aired on TV, but we've never had cable TV. Psoriasis is genetic. No, it is not contagious. It's something you inherit. I got it from my dad, which he's had all his life, and he noticed it more when he was a teenager. He kind of grew out of it. He got older, and he doesn't take medication for it. He just doesn't see it. Hey man, huge fan. You got me away from Android. Well, I hope you like it, Anthony. So you stream Peacock? Yes, I do. Let's see. I'm not in favor of everyone switching to Apple. I'm just in favor of everybody using what they want to use. Whatever works best for you, keep using that. And then if that happens to be Apple, then good for you. All right, I got to get going here. We got to have dinner soon. I can tell my wife is just about ready to start dinner. But what does headshot experts say? I think the worst part about skin diseases is the social awkwardness that goes along with it, because people can be very mean, which they shouldn't be, because it's not something you can control. Right. No, yeah, it's that part of it never really bothered me, just because you have to have somewhat thick skin when you go on the internet. People are going to, I still get comments to this day of like, Drew, you look fat. Drew, you should get a gym membership. Drew, you're looking chubby. So you got to acknowledge that there is some truth to what they're saying, but the delivery is obviously, it would rub a lot of people the wrong way. But I read so many comments, and I get so many critics and haters on my back. You just kind of get used to it when you've done YouTube as long as I have. It's like, yeah, what does that guy know? There's people critiquing your appearance, but they don't even have their face as their profile picture. So yeah, you just kind of get used to it over time. What's for dinner? I think we're having spaghetti. which I'm excited for. Will Apple ever innovate again, or did that end with Steve Jobs? I believe they're innovating right now with the ARM architecture. I think the Apple Silicon they've come up with is unparalleled, and I don't see anybody else in the industry making chips that fast and that efficient. So I still consider Apple innovative. It's just not always in the game changing way as iPhones and iPads were. Those are once in a lifetime type products. I don't think those are the types of products we're going to see once a decade or that kind of thing. Um, anyway, I got to get going. I could talk with you guys for hours, so I got to eventually stop myself. But I appreciate all the super chats and all the people tuning in. It seriously helps me out a ton, so I'm very grateful, and I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day. Take care. Bye.